Welcome, one and all, to JWC Livestream. JWC Livestream, this is Sublimated Poesy with David and Ricky. I'm Ricky, as you can see by my screen. And David is there too. David, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good evening.
Yes, it is. It's a wonderful evening to be able to get back to this talk of poesy and poetic language play and all these wonderful concepts. There was a little bit of a break since the last episode of this show. And now we're back. We're back with a vengeance. We have a lot of cool stuff to go over. A little bit of a different format, but the soul is true. The soul is the same. I have been, and once was long ago, I was a poet. And I'm coming back to that now, thanks to the help of a very good friend and a poet whom I revere. The thing about a muse that's firing back up after, a torpor or some sort of estrangement, alienation. Now, on a regular basis, the muse for poetry strikes. The other day, I wrote a beautiful one when we were driving through the hills where I live. And just the notion of it, the way that it came across, it was very, very satisfying. A little bit on the dark side, not gonna lie. A lot of my poetry is. I'm a bit of a flowery monster. I am. And this poem is no exception. There's a general terrible, a general quality of the terrible about it. And I used to write poems like that all the time. Sometimes they're pretty, but a lot of times they do what that one did. But it's satisfying. Does what it used to do when I was younger. It's like, it's unbelievable to come back to the muse's arms after all this time. And the rewards are many. I'm working on some other stuff, working on the Compass City, throwing down outlines for future books. Wanted to write a chapter here and there, but it's been more like I'm outlining for future projects. I got a bunch of them open that just won't leave me alone. So it's outlining time. And I've also been throwing down on essays. Someone who I respect advocated that I do such, and I find it a useful exercise. It's a good workout, and it's satisfying. It represents its own muse. So creativity for me has been great lately. David, how about you, man? How's your creative obsession going?
It's going very well. I'm working on a novel called Athenaeum with the host, and I'm outlining two different novels. One is called Billy, and the other is called Shutter. And I'm writing poetry and essays. We're putting together a anthology of essays, so long-term project. And we are also seeking authors who would like to submit essays. So if anyone listening would like to submit their work to Ricky, please do so. We'll provide information on how to contact him.
Leave it in the comments, folks. That would be great.
Yes, that would be really cool if you would, because we're trying to promote a nonfiction outlet for authors and creatives. Yes. So I've been very busy, and the work is satisfactory, and I can't wait to see what happens with the book Athenaeum. Is there anything you'd like to say about it, Ricky?
Yeah, it's been Athenaeum has been a great pleasure ever since it came into my life. The muse that we've been cultivating, the concepts that are working, it's a beautiful work of I guess high seas fantasy with pirates, but it really is transcending that. Like it's so much more. There's so much involved. It feels like it's not high fantasy, but it has elements of that. And the characters and the world building, it's been amazing, really. A fantastic project. The other day I noticed we were something like 87,000 words in, and that's a really clean format. So that's an accurate number of like where we are at the moment. Um, and there's only a little bit more to tidy up, get the appendices going. I think it's a great book, and I think it's going to have long legs, you know?
Yes, yes, it's been very beneficial to me to work on a collaborative project. It's taught me about working on timescales and in conjunction with an imagination other than my own. So this has been very instructive lesson for me. I highly recommend every writer, if they get an opportunity to do a collaborative piece, do it, particularly if it's with someone that you respect their writing and their there are going to be times when it's not going to be easy. It's not all sunshine and lemonade, and but you just it thickens your skin, and also it teaches you how to talk to other artists too. It's a negotiation. It's a bit almost like a dance. So, but yes, I highly recommend anyone listening, if you find another writer out there and they pitch an idea to you, don't brush it away and consider it for a while before you decide. It's well worth your investment of your time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I find I find it to be the same way. Like this collaboration has been excellent. I've done other collaborations over the years, and some of them the waters get choppy, you know. But when you're working with a real pro, someone who can write almost on command, no easy thing in life. Life's very serious and very heavy lately. So to be able to command creativity and engage your muse on a regular basis, it comes from devotion and someone who's laid the stepping stones and really put the hard work in to get that way. And then there's of course the the non-creative portions of dealing. There's compromise in game and compromise out of game, as we used to say. The in game has to do with the story and the characters and the world building. The out of game is the writers and the book craft, you know, the work and the professional stress of making money. And but it's very rewarding, very, very satisfying. And in this particular case, it's yielding a really wonderful book that I'm thrilled to be a part of. And it's all downhill from here. I mean, especially with that stuff you've been showing me lately. Plotline B with all those characters, it's wonderful. I have all the confidence in the world that you'll be able to execute this project, finish the rest of this. And then it'll just be delightful to do the chapter edits, put everything together. Really looking forward to the book craft aspect of it as well.
Yes, so am I.
Yeah, so what it boils down to is there's just so much fun in book craft, designing books, working with people. But it's no easy thing. You have to have people who are willing to set ego aside. And this David that we have here, this poet, this wonderful writer, he's able to do those things. I've been in collaborations before where people get fresh and carry on, and there's a lot of time that you have to deal with things instead of working and being creative. But when you have someone who really loves the muse, who loves creativity, it shows. And they look to transcend the situation. And I think we have that here. I'm very, very pleased. So we'll see. I don't know when it will be. Maybe by this time next year. Who knows? Who knows? But that book coming out, that's going to be a big deal. So today, now that we've caught up with each other and with the audience, today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be reading a poem by Reinaldo Arenas. He is a Cuban poet. And he might as well be as old man eternity as far as the great poets are concerned. But I only heard about him maybe a couple months ago. It was introduced to me by the esteemed poet himself, this David that we have here. Arenas is a fantastic poet, as you're about to find out. We don't need to agree with everything of any artist, but he sounds like a swell person besides, especially given all that he faced in his life. No easy thing being a poet. I'm sure all the poets in the audience said, hell yes. I wish I could, but that would be, I'm hosting, so there has to be decorum. But no easy thing being a poet. It's even less that way when the whole government of a country is coming after you and doesn't like you. You ready for that? You ready for that kind of poetry? That sounds like an adventure to me. See, this guy might as well be James Bond as far as I'm concerned. So what we have here, a wonderful specimen. It is called The Parade Ends, Reinaldo Arenas. All right. Thank you, David. Sorry about that. All right, folks, here's a little read along. Passing through the exploding streets, since the pipes are ready to give out, passing around the buildings we need to dodge, since they're falling onto us. Between the hostile faces, scrutinizing and sentencing us, between the closed establishments, closed markets, closed movie theaters, closed parks, closed cafes, exhibiting already dusty signs, justifications occasionally, closed for reforms, closed for reparation. What kind of reparation? When will this alleged reparation, alleged reform end? When at least will it begin? Closed, closed, closed. Everything closed. I arrive and open the innumerable locks, run up the improvised stairwell. There she is waiting for me. I discover her, remove the canvas and contemplate her dusty and cold dimensions. I get rid of the dust and caress her. With the slightest brushes from my palms, I clean her back, her base, her sides. I feel desperate, happy at her side. Before her, I run my hands over her keys, and rapidly everything is set in motion. The ta-ta, the jingling, the music starts little by little, already much faster. Now, at the greatest velocity, walls, trees, streets, cathedrals, faces and beaches, cells, mini cells, giant cells, starry night, naked feet, pine groves, clouds, hundreds, thousands, a million parrots, piano stools, and a vine. Everything shows up, everything arrives, everyone comes. The walls expand, the ceiling disappears, And naturally, you float. You float, ripped apart, swept along, elevated, taken, transported, externalized, saved for the sake of, and for this minuscule and constant cadence, for this music, for this incessant jingling. Now that's a poem. Passing through exploding streets, pipes are ready to give out. It seems like everything's falling apart. Some sort of apocalypse. Wonder why that would be. I bet I know. Everything closed, everything terrible. And then he goes and he seems to reclaim a piano, as if to reclaim something that has been lost, some bereavement. Perhaps it's his freedom. Perhaps it's a taste of yesterday. Really, really delicious, inescapable poem, especially when you think on the poet and what he endured. David, what did you think of that poem? I'd love to hear.
Well, it's a beautiful poem. It's full of what I would call action, poetic action. There's an urgency. We have an individual traveling through the wasteland of an urban setting where the economy of a people has been destroyed. And he's trying to make it to this place of safety, which to me represents liberation. Creation is liberation, as you like to say, Ricky. So that typewriter is his gateway to liberation. So it's absolutely an astounding, breathtaking poem.
Realizing his muse with regards to the instrument. I love a good keyboard, me. Never really wrote on a typewriter before. Lamentably, that opportunity has been taken from me. We had a nice typewriter in this family, and lo, it is gone. I have no idea why. Anyway, that's water under the bridge, but the poem itself is beautiful. Very, very accessible. And you feel his lament running through it. He would like to see bustling markets and commerce, wide open things, people, enjoyment, life. And instead he has closed for reforms. And those reforms they're not coming. And he knows it, he can feel it. You could feel him feeling it in the words. It's marvelous. Now, now that that's been explored, we're going to go over some of the points of his bio, the Serenus. He was born in the countryside of Newport Beach, Aguas Claras, Holguin province in Cuba, and later moved to the city of Holguin as a teenager. He was 6 years old when he started school, attending rural school 91 in Peronales County. Apologies for that, folks. Everybody has their weaknesses. Mine is Spanish reading, or Italian, or anything Latin, really. We all have our shortcomings. Despite his short life and hardships imposed during his imprisonment, as he was imprisoned, I imagine it was for something political. No mystery there. No real tolerance at that time in Cuba. Arenas produced a significant body of work. There were poetic efforts, El Central and Les Prosorio. His Pentagonia is a set of 5 novels that comprise the secret history of post-revolutionary Cuba. includes Singing from the Well, in Spanish also titled Celestino Before Dawn. Farewell to the Sea, whose literal translations is the sea once more. Palace of the White Skunks, Rebellion, Color of Summer, and The Assault. These novels, in these novels, Arenas' style ranges from a stark, realist narrative and high modernist experimental prose to absurd satirical humor. His second novel, Hallucinations, El Mundo El Suneti, rewrites the story of colonial descendant Prince Fray Servando Teresa de Mier. There were interviews in his autobiography where Arenas draws explicit connections between his own life experiences and the identities and fates of his protagonists, as is evident, and as his critics such as Francisco Soto have pointed out. The child narrator in Celestino, Fortuno, and the Palace, Hector of Farewell, and Tripoli, named Gabriel Ronaldo Gloomy Skunk, character and color appears to have live progressive stages of a continuous life story that is also linked to Arenas' own. So semi-autobiographical, which is certainly a thing that is done. Arenas consistently links his individual narrative life to the historic experience of a generation of Cubans. A constant theme in his novels and other writing is the condemnation of the Castro government, although Arenas also criticizes, or critiques rather, the Catholic Church, US culture, and politics. So his eyes were open, wide open. He is also a critique for various literary personalities from Cuba, particularly those he believed had betrayed him and suppressed his work. So this is what I'm talking about. You could write poetry, and who is it that persecutes you? Actually, in this country, there are people who might persecute your poetry if they don't like it. Isn't that interesting? That's true. More than one poet I have heard of, and I won't name names, but they have felt the hand or the fist of political persecution if they don't write according to some standard or comport themselves according to some conformist demand. And so that's a terrible thing that Arenas went through, and any poet would go through that. You have to have the common decency to give the poet freedom of speech, at least a little bit. Imagine being persecuted by a big, mean government like that, a hard tyranny. They must have been dreadful. Arenas' autobiography, Before Night Falls, was on the New York Times list of the 10 best books of the year 1993. In 2000, his work was made into a film directed by Julian Schainbel, in which Arenas was played by Javier Bardem. Javier Bardem is a wonderful actor, so I have to go out of my way to watch that. An opera based on the autobiography with libretto and music by Cuban-American composer Jorge Martin premiered at the Fort Worth Opera in 2010. The Ronaldo Arenas papers are held at Princeton University Library. The collection consists of personal and working papers of Ronaldo Arenas and includes transcript, typescript drafts, essays, interviews, newspaper clippings, correspondence, and other documents. And that is right, it should be in such a place to be studied and preserved. So that's the situation we're dealing with here. A wonderful poet. You heard that poem. Rings like crystal in your mind. And we find that this beautiful man, this gifted, talented poet was under persecution by Castro and other villains. Most horrifying. Everybody can have their own political views. Everybody can believe what they want about the various systems that mankind holds out, saying this will save you, that will save you. But the one thing that's indefensible is a tyranny, especially against a beautiful artist such as this. I have no tolerance and nothing but contempt for such things. David, how do you feel about all this and about Arenas himself? I'd love to hear.
That's a very complicated and detailed conversation. I try to summarize it with his relationship to revolution. First being part of the revolution as an idealistic youth, and then later realizing the tyranny that had sprung up in his native soil. It's we have to look at it through a lens of he was once reported to say that his motivation for writing was a revenge, but I think it was war. I think he was at war with the tyranny that had risen in Cuba and the suppression of free speech, expression, the constant state of worrying, being dragged away in the middle of the night. For example, The Color of Summer was stolen, was seized 3 times. He had to rewrite that book 3 times. So when I hear writers today complain that they can't find their inspiration or their muse, that they have writer's block, I would like to politely direct them to the nearest totalitarian state. They will find their passion. They will find their muse quite directly. And that's a terrible thing to say, obviously. But it gave him his theme. And if you look at the subjects, the way he writes these novels, it's almost as if he's writing in the style of a hallucination, because the entire country was a madhouse of destruction, of the destruction of the Cuban culture and the people and the heritage. So it's a very sane response to an insane and intolerable situation that suppressed the very spirit of what he was as a Cuban author. So, as I said, I could go on for quite some time talking about his life, but those are the things that I want to concentrate on. And the bitter irony towards the end of his life, when he managed to escape Cuba and moved to New York City, he was further suppressed by communists in the intellectual community in New York City. And they made it difficult for him to publish his work because they were people that were sympathetic to Castro and Castro's regime. These are the same sort of people that exist in academia today. There's no need to name names. Everyone who is in academia knows who these people are.
Yeah,
but it's a cancer on our educational system.
Yes.
And it's suppressing and destroying creativity.
It is clearly.
Yeah.
I've seen it. I've seen it as an example myself. All merit and all purity has gone out of the fire of poetry because of some demand and ideology, some conformist herd that is just endlessly stampeding over the lives of legitimate creatives. It's hard enough to write poetry, let alone sling it, let alone be persecuted for it, especially when you're not writing anything hateful and you're just trying to express yourself the way that Arenas did. Yes. Somehow some muckety-muck in a uniform thinks that he knows better about what life is.
Yes. Consider that he was arrested between 4 to 6 times and imprisoned and tortured. The torture that I won't speak of that I won't speak about in this format because it's inappropriate to do so. There's the only way to address the madness of that revolution is to address it with the madness of his mind. So that what would normally be considered some sort of distorted poetry is actually a very sane description of what was happening in his country. And it always shocks me to hear young idealists wanting to bring that to America. So I don't want to get too political, but this does boil my blood. The discussion of communism, and
Yes,
it's not about freedom. It's never about equality or utopia. It's always about a redistribution of resources and wealth and power. That's all it is. So I'll leave it at that. But that is really what he was at. And tragically, he died at the end of it. The end of his life, he contracted HIV, and then it developed into full-blown AIDS, and he could not get the medical treatment that he needed. So sadly, he did take an overdose of pills at the end of his life because he was no longer able to do his work. He wasn't even able to write. And that's how you kill any writer, is you take away their ability to write, and that will kill them. Otherwise, a writer, poet can survive anything.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Circling back, we're not trying to be partisan or political here. We're trying to reflect on the tragedy of statist persecution for this man, and how he was hunted. He had to rewrite that manuscript 3 times. You know what kind of willpower that takes? It takes willpower to write it once.
And he had to hide it too in the walls of his friend's house. He had to have it smuggled out of the country to be published in another country. And upon which he was then arrested for when the Cuban authorities discovered that he had published this book. So
hunted. What is it to be a literary outlaw? The question's been asked many, many times, because he's not the only one. Governments have been suppressing literature for a long time, coming after people, making life very difficult for them. And in this case, they tortured him, they drove him, they persecuted and hunted him. They made him miserable, and eventually he was exiled from his home country. And that was its own agony. But then to fall victim during the AIDS crisis and be reduced to what he was. I mean, we're reflecting on the tragedy here. Our political views aren't necessary to be expressed. What is necessary to be expressed is the impact of tyranny on a bright soul such as him, someone who's a creative. We're focusing on the glory of his creative works. We're not focusing on his downfall. But we do have to put the horn into that which drove him to that desperate end, that terrible end, because he might have lived a lot longer, and he might have written a lot more and given a lot more to us, especially if he wasn't hounded by a mob of lunatics. That's the sadness. That's the tragedy behind it.
It's also paradoxically the joy too. If you look at it in his ability to rise up time after time and defy the state and write is it's a glorious triumph act of it's a kind of success. You know, this people like to make excuses in their lives, and I'm talking about people in general. I know I certainly do. When I reflect on his life, I feel ashamed of the things that have held me back from doing my work. So he inspires me. His life story inspires me. As depressing as it is, it's also very inspirational too. He sets an example for all writers.
I feel him in my heart. I have some Cuban ancestry myself, and a Cuban poet, a poet who stood up to tyranny, a poet who fought till the end and then couldn't fight anymore. I hear that echo I hear that echo in the halls of my own life. I'm fit maybe for his shadow, maybe, but he, because of all he endured and what he was proved, how he proved himself against all of that. The persecution that I endure is by comparison, it's a soft persecution. The things they were doing to him were borderline atrocities. Now, like at the end of every show, we start to home in on the wisdom. Wisdom, what is the wisdom? The wisdom is there's a way to separate the poem from the poet. And that's kind of what we do with this content. But then at the end, we try to wed them together again, and we try to find out more. And the greatest question to ask in some instance like this, to get that mythical more, is if this happened to us, if we repersonalized Uranus to ourselves, and do a little exercise. If you're driving or traveling, you don't have to, but close your eyes and sit there and imagine. You were born in America, and then somebody takes over America, this dictator, and overthrows it and changes everything, or wherever you're from in the world. I want you to take your home country and use it as the experiment. If it's America, if it's whatever. Now imagine that gets toppled and all you want to do is write poetry. You don't, and you want to express that. And if the government wasn't a big, bully, mean dictatorship like this thought experiment that we're engaging in, then you would be able to express yourself. You wouldn't have to get censored. You wouldn't have to get canceled because you have a belief that flies against the statist authority or the regime, however you want to put it. Whatever delicate word you want to insert, by all means. How would you deal with it? I can say for my part, not entirely well. I wouldn't be able to take it well. I have a hard time holding on to the roller coaster I'm in here, let alone this ghoulish, dreadful, theoretical dictatorship that I might live in. It's bad enough as it is, I say. So if it were to get worse, imagine. So you write. Would you continue to write your soul? Would you continue to write your principles? Given that jackboots can kick your door off its hinges at any hour of the night, and you could get dragged away to some torture pen somewhere. Insert John Rambo from Rambo 2, 3, however you want to look at it. That's the bare minimum of what's happening to you. It don't sound so good, does it? Could you still write poetry? Could you still own your literature under those circumstances? Kind of makes you wonder. David, how about you, man? If you were Uranus, or how would you have lived your life? What would you have done?
It's difficult to say. I would probably take the position, knowing the man that I am today, that I wouldn't have survived. It takes a certain kind of rebellious individuality that I would of course say yes. Of course, I would have rebelled against the state. I would have written secretly. I would have tried to publish my writing. But the moment you're taken from your home and placed under arrest and tortured and beaten, that has it's not just an act of physical abuse. It's psychologically damaging to the imagination and the spirit of the person enduring the torture. So no, I really cannot think of any circumstance where I would be tough enough to endure what this man went through. And I perhaps know one or two people that I've met in my life that could, but um, I'm not even certain that they could. Most people bow to power, to tyranny, because there's a kind of despair that's created that humans are in some ways very weak creatures. If without our comforts, without our comfortable homes and uh, our things that we enjoy to eat, or the programs we watch on television or see at the cinema, we're very weak animals to a certain extent. And it doesn't take much to bring most people to their knee and force them into compliance. So no, I don't think I could under any circumstance, to be completely honest. That's why I want to take this moment to tell people to heed the advice of George Orwell. What is the lesson in 1984? The lesson is don't let it happen.
Yes. Rise up against conformity, rise up against tyrannical statism and toxic globalism. Rise up against that which oppresses creativity and the freedom of the soul. We're not trying to be partisan. We're advocates of creativity and the freedom of the soul. If there's something that comes in the way of that, yes, we will look at it like it's a foe, regardless of what it is. Because we stand behind people like him and we admire Arenas for what he endured, especially at the hands of his government. But it's hard enough being a poet. It's hard enough telling the truth in a world that does not value the truth. There are many unwanted truths on this mud wall that people, they look at like they're smelling mange. And this man, he must have been looked at, he must have been persecuted and judged by the unworthy, and they drove him. But I agree with David. There's a way to look at it as positive because his struggle was mighty. And what we always try to do on this show and in JWC in general is to focus on what is inspiration. What is inspiration? Anything inspirational is the highest coin in the realm for a creative. Because it's ideas, it's years worth of ideas in a moment. It's a hyperstate of time to be inspired. Anyone who's like that should be held up. There should be a crowd surfing situation for them to get where they need to go. Because they can change everything. They can change the whole world. Now, I don't know that this man, Ronaldo Anaras, changed the world. But he stood up and he resisted. And if we all were creative like him, did beautiful things like him, if we all stood up and resisted like him, the world would be freer and therefore better. I'm not saying anarchy and madness. I'm not saying, all these notions of dark revolution, blooded revolutions. I'm saying to do what he did. Not be afraid as they confiscated and persecuted and tortured him. He just kept writing. He kept staying true. The whole weight of that government was on him, and they didn't deform him. He took his way out because of the brutality of his condition. But otherwise, he fought. As far as I'm concerned, he fought to the end. And Alighieri wasn't the only one in exile. So was he. And then to be persecuted here, it's called no escape. Helplessness, folks. How do you deal with helplessness? It's a question I ask everyone. Powerlessness, helplessness. How do you deal with it? usually leads to anxiety or a panic attack or who knows what. Imagine how anxious he must have been getting hunted by this regime and persecuted, even in this country, by those who are sympathetic to tyrants and to systems of tyranny. Oof, heavy duty. May we all be so mighty and so resolute against these dark forces, because it ain't just in Cuba. Tyranny waits all over the place. It's a chameleon. It takes various forms. And tyranny holds down the creative spirit and oppresses the artist. Then it's beyond its murder and its terror and other words that we'll leave out. These things are just as appalling. Holding back a bright soul, it's just as terrible in its own way, relatively. Anyway, we honor Ronaldo Arenas. Well, no one will comment about what he did or what he did not do. What we will say is what he survived and what he failed to survive. And we all hope that we will be as creative and resilient as he was, should persecution come to us. And it will, and it has. Maybe not as bad as him, but bad enough. We can draw inspiration from him and transcend it like he did. David, how do you feel about all this? And is there anything else you'd like to say about this great poet, Arenas?
Yeah, I have 4 points that I want to cover concerning his life, and
Very
we
good.
can use them as a guidepost to interpreting how we can apply the message to our life. He was born into poverty and lived in the countryside. His grandfather was a farmer. Then the revolution came, Castro's revolution, trying to overthrow Batista. And he took part in that for a while until he was sent home back to his family. And then by the time he got to the age to enter college, he studied first at an agricultural college and then in a technical college, and was apparently it was intended that he would write propaganda for the state. But what he really did was he never completed that work. And he started his process of becoming a rebel of the rebellion. So he was starting his revolution against the revolution that had just occurred in Cuba. And he lived under that oppression for a long time and was arrested many times and beaten and tortured. And then he was able to escape on a boat to Florida and then eventually end up in New York City. And like the political writer Hannah Arendt, he was in a certain way a refugee, regardless of whether or not he had an official status in the U.S. He was still an outsider because his heart, his very soul and being was Cuban. And it was a Cuba that had been destroyed. So he became permanently, in a certain sense, a stateless person. And when a person becomes stateless, they are the most vulnerable of people, because even criminals, as Hannah Arendt points out, have some legal rights. But a stateless person, it's as if they're nothing and they have no rights. And any power can arrest them, put them into a refugee camp or a death camp, can do whatever they choose to with that person. So my message to everyone is, don't let the country you live in become taken to that point where you can become stateless because you argue against the political ideas of the of the government that's in power. I mean, become politically active, exercise your civil rights as much as you can, and participate, think, write, challenge, rebel. I mean, be a dissident. Don't just believe in comfort or safety, which is a big problem today. A lot of people would rather feel safe than they would free, and to me that's an alarm bell, and it's very frightening to me.
Yeah, it's the mark of a diseased culture. And then it's easy to fall into conformity and not think for yourself. It's dreadfully easy, especially when they keep you so busy. Everything's so busy and so heavy. No just compensation, no middle class, not so easy to deal with. Again, these are soft tyrannies, soft atrocities, but like David's saying, best to dig your heels in periodically, best to let them know that it's not, you don't want to be persecuted like Uranus was. You don't want it to ever get to that point. There's intermittent levels where the chaos and the tyranny rises, but we have to be there to meet it and lead principled lives of creativity. No one wants to hurt anyone. I don't want anyone to get hurt. I don't think Uranus did either, although who knows? It's not easy. It's easy to lose yourself. It's easy to lose your soul. It's easy to let something take away that innocence or that inner child of yours that wouldn't hurt a fly. Eventually getting beaten and persecuted and abused and stepped on, and eventually that stuff it leaves an impression. It doesn't matter how powerful you think you are. But he, look at all he wrote and look at what he did and how he fought. In my opinion, they didn't defeat him. And that's an inspiration for us all. David, have you made your points, sir? Because I certainly don't want to take away from anything.
No, I have. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to talk about this author. He's been an important example for me and a bit of a literary hero. I highly recommend you read all of the Pentagonia, and also I would read Before Night Falls and see the film, because it's all very relevant to what's going on now today in various parts of the world where freedom is being challenged. So
that's right.
And it's just beautiful to read too. I mean, he wrote highly metaphoric, dense language that has a hallucinatory quality to it, that transports the reader into the mind of his characters, the madness that they're suffering through. And that's the key feature of his particular voice that I find very appealing. He can really take you into the point where you feel like you are that character, or it's someone close to you, a family member or a friend that you see suffering. So it's very profound and powerful writing.
Yes, it is. And that's the goal of creatives. Powerful and profound, timeless, transcendent. That's the name of the game. Well, time flies when you're having fun, folks. It's been my assertion, the thing I put forth, that humans are time machines. And this episode specifically shows it. I mean, it blinked, and now we're at the end. Love bringing this content to you. Talking about poets and about language play and poetic voice fulfillment. It's what JWC tries to be about when it tries. Head on over to joeswritersclub.com. Check out our authors and our bio pages, our blogs. Head on over to joeswriters.club and sign up on our forums. Check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. And most importantly, head over to Joe's Writers Club, JWC Livestream at YouTube, on YouTube. We have our own YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe, share it, spread the word, especially if you like what we're doing, what we're talking about here. We love doing it, but the more subscribers we get, the more likes and shares, the more we can help you. And that's what it is, trying to help with poetry, try to help with the muse, get people to acknowledge creativity in their lives before they make it illegal. David, I want to thank you for coming on the show today and illuminating and elucidating these matters as you did. And thank you again for introducing me to the poet Aranus, who I value. Thanks again.
You're welcome.
And thanks for watching, folks. We'll try to do this pretty regular every Monday. You know, life is busy. Things are imperfect. So if we miss one, you'll forgive us, but show us you care. Give us some shares, give us some likes, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Stay creative, everyone.